Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise this evening to debate Bill C-14. For those who might just be catching up on what C-14 is, it is dealing with an updating of the grandfather clause of the Constitution from 1867 as reset in 1985. I think at some point in this place we should put forward a grandmother clause. I'm just looking at some of my other female colleague MPs in this place. But the grandfather clause, we know, is to say, look, this is what it is. We're going to keep it the way it was. What we're doing with this bill is to say that the composition of Parliament will not drop below the seat counts as they occurred in the 43rd Parliament. So that's basically what we have now. 338 MPs, of which 78 are from Quebec, 121 are from Ontario. I won't go through the whole list. For my home province of British Columbia, no fewer than 42 seats going forward under the new, as I've renamed it, grandmother clause. There are a number of issues to unpack in this. The primary one is that this bill is making sure that Quebec does not lose any seats in the current every decade review of representation by population and whether we are more or less representing the same numbers of people across the country. This is no easy effort. This is very difficult. I just attended the public hearing in Victoria, BC, on the Boundary Commission for British Columbia, which is proposing to add another seat because population redistribution is adding relatively more people to British Columbia than to some other provinces. They're proposing, by the way, to add the new seat in interior British Columbia. So it has a big effect on the members from Thompson Kamloops, from Mission Matsui Fraser Canyon, from southern Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, central Okanagan rather, Similkameen Nicola. Very little impact on my own riding. But the process of going through that, staring at the riding maps, thinking about representation by population, put me very much in mind of some other ideas. In fact, when I spoke at the public hearing in Victoria about the riding boundaries and the proposals of the Boundary Commission, I said to them, you know, really, in the interest of democracy, is it really in the interest of our constituents to add more MPs to the chamber, to the House of Commons year on year? I put to them, when I was first elected in this place in 2011, the Parliament that I joined and had the honor to stand in the other place, in Centre Block for the first time, we had 308 members of Parliament. And now we have 338. Does it add to the representation of our constituents, or does it dilute it? How much of the notion of adding an MP here and there is really effective in representation? I think about, as has come up recently in the debate tonight, our colleagues who represent vast territories. The Member of Parliament for Skeena-Bulkley Valley has a territory, I think it's 2 times Germany, but that may be the wrong, but I remember his predecessor, Nathan Cullen, saying something like that fairly often, 2 times the size of Germany, hard to get around. Our colleague from Nunavut has an electoral district that takes in 3 time zones. It's an enormous territory, and commercial aircraft won't get you from one end to the other. You have to either hire private planes or fly from Iqaluit to Ottawa to then go up to Inuvik. It's not easy. And the population of Nunavut is never going to be well, I shouldn't say never. On current demographic trends, is not going to be the equivalent of my riding of Saanich Gulf Islands, which under the current proposal from the Electoral Boundaries Commission would represent 122,000 people, or more than 4 times the population of Nunavut. Let's think about what we could do that would be creative. I said to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, you know, much more important for democracy than representation by population would be fair voting, proportional representation, that every voter knows that their vote is going to count. At that point, the very professional, hard-working team that is the Electoral Boundaries Commission for British Columbia said, that's beyond our area. So I take it to my colleagues here because it is specifically our area. What's in the interest of democracy in the 21st century? Is it that we continue to add MPs to pile into this place? I suggest to you, when you look at the Palace of Westminster and the Chamber of Commons there are no desks because there's no room there. If every MP showed up, they wouldn't fit in the room because it would be 650 MPs trying to squeeze in a chamber that would be perfect for about half that number. If we add more MPs and constantly add, we add to the cost of this place, where the average Canadian feel that they're better served by continually adding to the cost of the House of Commons. Or my alternate proposal, it would be less costly to the taxpayer and I believe more efficient in properly representing our constituents if, depending on population, the what's called members' office budget, or MOB, was expanded, so that we wouldn't add more MPs, but MPs that represented higher population areas would be able to have more constituency staff to handle the casework, to make sure that the level of representation we give our constituents is beyond gold standard. That's what we want to do, right? We want to be able to respond to the constituents who are saying, I've been on the phone with Service Canada for 9 hours in a row, and then they hang up on me and they drop the call. We don't have enough people in my office to deal with every single case that comes up, but we try. So what I would propose is we look at the job of a member of parliament and say, we do two things in this place. We, as our opening prayer suggests from the speakers, we pass laws and make wise decisions, or at least we try. We debate public policy, as we're doing tonight. We also serve in a completely different way our constituents in a nonpartisan way, helping with their pensions, their passports, their unemployment insurance, their disabilities, their need for help, CRA. We all have our issues. We work really hard to help our constituents. Wouldn't we have better representation if we didn't just add to the numbers of members of parliament in this place, but expanded the resources for those that were either challenged by large population numbers or huge distances, such that a member of parliament in a huge terrain would have the money to, the budget, to have offices in more locations, to be more convenient for constituents. Representation by population may not be the most democratic way to ensure that the Canadian democracy thrives. I think, regardless of political stripe, we should all be troubled by what just happened in Ontario, in that almost 60% of eligible voters didn't turn out to vote. There are a number of theories for why that happened, which means that a majority government that got 40% of the vote of the 43% of people who showed up elected a majority without the majority of public support. In fact, the Doug Ford government in Ontario has the active support, as measured by who went out to vote for them, of 18% of the Ontario public. I'm not blaming Doug Ford, but the first past the post voting system does not encourage voting. And you can compare countries, and it's the minority of countries, by the way, that use first past the post. Countries with fair voting see people interested in turning out to vote. Le niveau de participation dans les élections.
Voter turnout in countries that use proportional voting, rep by pop, is higher than in other countries with our current voting system.
If we revived the Prime Minister's 2015 election campaign promise that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. Well, it's hard to revive that because we've had 2019 and 2021, but we could and we should say, what's in the interest of democracy today? Is it adding more MPs to this place, increasingly cogs in the wheels of large political machines where people show up here and are told how to vote by their party whips, or make it more democratic by ensuring that everyone here is and that the Parliament as a whole represents accurately the way Canadians actually voted. Ce n'est pas trop tard pour...
It's not too late to make the change. It's an urgent idea.
Discussion of C14 by bringing us back to more fundamental questions. Can we improve the services we provide to our constituents? Can we ensure this place doesn't just expand forever as we have more population? Can we deliver real democracy that inspires Canadians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for... I know. It's because he's got the longer one, I'm going to make sure that I get it right. West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank my honourable colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands for her speech and some very insightful questions that came up at her public hearing for boundary redistribution. I'm very interested because I have one coming up for my own riding as well. And I also agree that it is very troubling to see the level of turnout that we just had in the Ontario election, as well as the fact that that we need to better support our constituency staff who are doing incredible work, and I'm very grateful for the constituency staff that I have that make my job much, much easier and really help so many constituents. But my question to the member is, given what we saw in Ontario and the low turnout, what would be her thoughts on the Government of Canada looking at a mandatory voting system along the lines that countries like Australia have?
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had promised another friend I wouldn't mention the Special Parliamentary Committee on Electoral Reform, on which we both served. But one of the things we studied was, would mandatory voting make a difference? We were tasked with looking at what voting system would be best for Canada. It was while I was a member of that committee that I discovered the first time a parliamentary committee had studied first past the post was actually in 1921, when that parliamentary committee concluded that first past the post was not a system that worked for Canada. But in studying mandatory voting, I concluded it might be an improvement over what we have now, but it doesn't inspire people to vote. It makes people feel they have to vote. And I'd rather inspire them to know their vote is really going to count.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mission, Mascouy, Fraser Canyon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from the Gulf Islands for her interventions this evening. Does the member believe that British Columbia should have equal representation in the House of Commons, and that the Band-Aid solution that we're applying here to C-14 is really just avoiding the big questions that our country is facing? And secondly, I'd love to hear some more comments from the member on her interaction with the Electoral Commission as it relates to effective representation in rural Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put forward that the honourable member for Mission, Mascouy, Fraser Canyon is such a good MP that he shouldn't worry that he needs more people on his team. We in British Columbia represent our constituents well, and I don't think mere numbers make that much of a difference. He obviously is not in my party. I worry actually about the way the Boundary Commission proposes to split up Mission, Mascouy, Fraser Canyon. I'm very, as he will know, very attached to parts of that riding, particularly Ashcroft, and would like to see good representation continue. As for the the Electoral Commission, it was a good experience. I have to say, and also conferring with other MPs, we're not finding that a lot of our constituents are super interested in showing up at these hearings. Maybe they're not being really well advertised. I don't know, but I think it is, when voting time comes, I worry that constituents who've lived in one riding will suddenly say, but wait a minute, I don't know I don't know where I vote. I worry about making too many small changes that aren't necessary, such as on Vancouver Island. But I wish the honourable member for Mission, Mascouy, Fraser Canyon very good luck in whatever's happening to his riding.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments.
The honourable member for Rimouski, Neigette, Témiscouata, Basque. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to my colleague's speech, and there's one thing I'd like him to explain. On March 2nd, the Bloc tabled a motion which the colleague supported, which was to protect and preserve Quebec's political clout, i.e. not lose any seats. But also, the Bloc tabled a bill, C-246, which was along the same lines as the motion my colleague supported, but they voted against that bill. And now the government's trying to do damage control with C-14 by protecting the number of seats, but not protecting the political influence of Quebec, because other provinces other than Quebec will get more seats. So why did he vote for the Bloc's motion and then vote against the Bloc's bill? The honourable member for Saanich, did she vote, rather? It's difficult to give a short answer to that because it's a very good question. I had a problem with the private member's bill with the idea of protecting the political influence of Quebec. I'm in favor of the principle, but the idea of having a set percentage, like 25%, why not some other number? That's a problem to my mind. Maybe I made a mistake. I'm open to the idea. I'm in favor of the principle, but not in favor of that private member's bill, and I'm sorry for that.